All right, this Parshas Chukas, and which discusses the Parah Aduma, the red cow that was burnt was a form of a sacrifice. The ashes were put together with the outside the base of Mikdash was burnt. The ashes were coupled with living waters, and it was sprayed on a person who became contaminated because of contact with the dead. Halachically, somebody who comes in contact with the dead, or somebody who is in a room with a dead body, it has a prohibition from coming to certain areas of the Beis HaMikdash. He's prohibited from touching certain holy foods, and because of that, and then the Torah instituted a process of tahara, a process of purification, which involved his being sprinkled with the ashes of the Parah Aduma, of the red cow, and also with the living waters that was mixed together with it, and also he went to a mikveh, and then he was able once again, in a sense, to come close to the spiritual rituals that he was not able to be involved with because of his contact with the dead. And the Torah tells us that the Zos Chukas HaTorah, this is the command or the decree. This is the decree of the Torah. In other words, there are a number of different types of commandments in the Torah. Popularly, we speak of two types of commandments, of chukim and mishpatim. There are those who speak of three types, but we'll limit ourselves to the two categories. Chukim represents the types of mitzvos, the types of decrees of the Torah that we do not comprehend. The din of shatnez, of mixing linen and wool and clothes, that is prohibited. On the basis of logic, we're not really able to understand the reason for it. We can give all kinds of explanations. But as my uncle said, you have explanations of why, you have explanations of how, and you have explanations of what. When it comes to chukim, we can give explanations, but the explanations are only of what. It's not why and how. We can't understand. We're not capable of understanding how the Parah Aduma is metaher, purifies us. We certainly don't understand why the Parah was used. But when we study the mitzvah Parah Aduma, there is a message contained in it. And the message that one person gets from the study of the mitzvah Parah Aduma might be a different message. And in different periods of times, there would be different messages. Rabbi Moshe Darshan, when he explained the mitzvah Parah Aduma, he says the parah represents the adult cow, the mother cow, and the egel, the golden calf, was in the image of a child cow. But the mother has to clean up the mess that the child made. In other words, what he was saying is that Parah Aduma is, and we know that from Chazal, Parah Aduma is a kapara, it's an atonement for the Egel Hazav. That also, but there's still a lot lacking. That's not the reason why. But that's when Ramosha Darshan looked at the mitzvah. That was perhaps what it was telling him. Perhaps it was telling him that sometimes when younger generations act improperly, it emphasizes the responsibility of the older generations to get involved. And very often, if the older generations don't get involved, so the younger generations become like wild grass, both spiritually and otherwise. And perhaps we could say that whatever it is, but that's only an explanation. It's not a real explanation. It's a what? It's a message. When I study Parah Aduma, I receive a message also from the study, but to me that it's perhaps a different message than Moshe Darshan had, and different generations will perhaps see different messages in the mitzvah because that's the nature of a chok. The nature of a chok is that man is limited. Man can't really understand. And it's interesting. There's a very strange medrash. It's brought down in the medrash. There's a Sefer Medrash Pliya, lists many strange medrashim. And it says, what did Korach, who led a rebellion, last week's Sedra, yesterday's reading, what did he see that led him to rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu? He says he saw the mitzvah of Parah Aduma. Now we have to understand the mitzvah of Parah Aduma is what led him to rebel, to lead this rebellion against Moshe. And we have to understand also Moshe Rabbeinu, he performed all these nisim, all these miracles. Not as the messenger of God. He took the Jewish people out of Egypt. He was the intermediary at Kriyas Yamsuf, at the splitting of the sea. And all the adverse circumstances that overtook the Jewish people in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu was there to help them. And all of a sudden, Korach leads a rebellion. 250 Roshi Sanhedrios, spiritual leaders, join him in the rebellion. And why? Because of Parah Aduma. How we understand this medrash. Now, there is the medrash mentions in last week's Sedra, medrash is somewhat troubled. Why Parshas Korach comes immediately after the Parsha of Vayomer, which talks about the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the medrash says that Korach went to Moshe and he said to Moshe Rabbeinu, now we know that the mitzvah of tzitzis has white strands and blue strands. Today, there is some question as to whether we really know what the tchelis, the blue coloring, the blue dye, is the proper dye for the tzitzis. Because of that, there seems to be different customs, whether to paint or to dye some of the strands of the tzitzis, the machlokis, how many? Some of the strands of the tzitzis with the blue dye. So Korach went to Moshe, and he said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what happens if a person has a beged kula shel tchelis? He has a talis that is completely blue. Completely blue. Does it need tzitzis also? Apparently, Korach felt the whole necessity of tzitzis was to have the strands of the tzitzis that were blue among those strands. But if for some reason there wasn't the need to have blue strands, it wasn't necessary to have the tzitzis. All you needed to do is wear the beged, wear the talis without the tzitzis. So Korach said to Moshe, in a sense, he taunted Moshe. And he said to Moshe, what happens if somebody has a completely blue beged, a blue talis, and the whole talis was dyed in tchelis? Does it need tzitzis or it doesn't need tzitzis? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, whatever the color of the talis is, it requires tzitzis. Yes, it does need tzitzis. So Korach made fun of Moshe's response. He says, what does 1, 2, whatever strand of blue add to a completely blue talis, to where the whole talis itself was dyed blue? And he took the 250 Rashi Sanhedrios, leaders of different Batei Dinim, who were among his supporters, and he had them all wear a blue talis without any tzitzis attached to the corners. And a similar medrash, the medrash says, there is some question why the medrash uses that. Tzitzis, we know, it's because that the whole episode of Korach is mentioned after the tzitzis. But he said, if you have a bayis smoli svarim, you have a house with a big library of svarim, does it need a mezuzah? What did a mezuzah contain? Mezuzah was a small piece of parchment. You could have a large mezuzah also that contained 2 parshios, Shema and V'hayim Shemoah. And Moshe Rabbeinu said yes. And Korach made fun of it. It doesn't mention in the Medrash that he made 250 houses, but he again, and I assume I've mentioned it before. The reason the Medrash mentions it is because when Moshe Rabbeinu sends a messenger to Dasan Bavira, when he tries to influence them not to follow the ways of Korach, so it's mentioned that they stood Nitzavim Pesach Hoel in the entranceway. They stood in a defiant mood at the entranceway to their tent. Obviously, the Medrash drew some kind of connection between the fact that their act of defiance was by an entranceway to the tent, and associated that with the mitzvah of mezuzah. So the question is, what is going on here? And my uncle said that there are three forms of knowledge: Chachma, Bina, V'das. Now, Lubavitch, I'm not going into the esoteric explanations, but I'm speaking from the simple explanations. Lubavitch has a lot of esoteric explanations of Chachma, Bina, V'das. But Chachma simply means acquired knowledge. Bina is Maven Dover Mitoch Dover, to be the power, the ability to deduce one thing from another. What is Das? Literally, of course, the Rashi that says the Das is Ruach HaKodesh and all that. But the literal translation of Das is common sense. We say a Shota doesn't have Das. He could be a genius, but if he doesn't have Das, you can't really. He's not considered to have any real understanding. So my uncle pointed out that when it comes to any type of job, be it mathematics, a person is a mathematics teacher, a professor of mathematics, a researcher in mathematics, science, medicine, we don't base it just on common sense. You don't give medicine on the basis of common sense. You give medicine, you test it out, you see what are the side effects of the medicine. There is acquired knowledge. And sometimes we can deduce from one case to another case. But you can't build a house just on the basis of common sense. If you didn't study and learn about architecture, but somehow when it comes to religion, everybody is an authority. Everybody is an authority. And that was Korach's claim. Korach's claim against Moshe, you're not special. Kolei the kulam doshem, ubesocham Hashem. You're not anyone special. And why? From a religious perspective, if shilas of halacha, if questions of Jewish law have to be decided on the basis of bina, of chachman bina, of acquired knowledge, and the ability to deduce one fact from the other because of previous studies, because of analogies that one can make, that one understands how to make, then only Moshe Rabbeinu stood above everybody else. But if it's based on common sense, everybody has common sense. There was a custom that's been adopted in many synagogues of ritual committees. And sometimes these ritual committees decide halachic questions that the members of the committee, laymen, have no idea what it's all about. They wouldn't make such a committee when it comes to decide what medicine they should take or they should give to their children or to their parents. They wouldn't make such a committee to decide how to build their houses. If they'll have questions, they'll go to architects, they'll go to builders. But when you just do it on the basis, but when it comes to religion, somehow everybody is an authority. Everybody is an authority. So this was the argument. Korach felt that when it comes to religion, everything is on basis of common sense. And from the back, if Chachma, acquired knowledge, is not important in religion, if Bina, the ability to draw analogies between one case in halacha and another case in halacha is not important, but only common sense is important. So then there's a basis for the ritual committees. And that's why Korach said this, Kola Eida Kula B'doshim. Madua Tisnasu Alam Hashem, why do you put yourself above the nation of God? You're not special. It's common sense. The way everybody thinks, the natural disposition to think. And the question is, Korach was probably a smart man. He saw all of this. But Korach, in Pirkei Avos we say that Kina Taiva B'Kavod Motzina Sodom and Olam. There are three things that remove a person from the world. Kina is jealousy. Taiva is desire. Kavod is honor. What does it mean, Motzina Sodom and Olam? Take a person out of the world. You could say that when a person is motivated by these things, he's likely to lose his portion or part of his portion in the world to come that he would have had otherwise. But it doesn't seem that that's the simple explanation. The simple explanation is a person loses contact with reality. Sometimes a person who is affected by jealousy, by taiva, by desire, by his need or for honor, makes him lose contact with everything that's going on. He will do things that are beyond reason. They'll search for arguments, and the arguments they'll give will not be the reason why they're saying it, but it will be the excuse. Korach was very jealous. The Medrash tells us he felt he should have gotten a position, and he didn't get a position. And others got it. He had kina and kavod he wanted. But he needed an argument. And sometimes we develop our philosophy in order to accommodate our jealousy, our rebellion based on jealousy, on desire, and a seeking of honor. It's not that the philosophy leads us to make certain demands. It's on the contrary. The philosophy is developed because of these reasons. And to a certain degree, that's what happened with Korach. And it's interesting when they talk about the followers, of course, there were other followers of Korach also, we see that. But who is emphasized? The 250 Rosh Sanhedrios, people who are interested in positions of leadership. So they bought into this. They needed an argument. And it could be as a result of their kinetayv and kavod. They came so irrational that they believed actually what they said. Even though you would think after all the experiences, but that's losing contact with reality. And this was this was the this is what the Medrash Rabbah means. Korach was upset. Korach was jealous. Korach felt that he was cheated. He didn't get the kavod that he felt that it was coming to him. But he needed to fashion an argument. The idea of Chok, what is the idea of Chok? Chok is a mitzvah, a decree of God. And a person cannot reinterpret the Chok to meet the needs of the time or to meet his needs, because it's a Chok. It's a decree. The reasons for the decree are beyond our grasp. Consequently, we cannot, and we do not have the ability, nor the right, to interpret that law. And to a certain degree, those Chukas Torah, that's true about all the mitzvahs of the Torah, but especially those that are identified as Chukim. So Korach wanted to make a popular revolt, as my uncle called it, against Torah, against Moshe. And he saw Parah Aduma, and he said, that will be my popular revolt. You know, the idea behind Parah Aduma is a chok. It's a decree. It can't be reinterpreted to meet the needs or the perceived needs of the masses. And when they speak of the masses, they mean by the leaders of the masses. Korach wanted to be the leader of the masses. That's the idea. Korach said, common sense. What does one blue strand add to the tzitzis? What does one little piece of parchment add to a house that is a library of Sfarim? Common sense. Everything has to be based on common sense. And since it's based on common sense, more so than Chachma and Bina, than acquired knowledge and deductive knowledge. So Moshe, you're not special. Yeah, you might know more, but when it comes to religion, common sense is the main factor. And this so he used this argument. To make his point, to draw support from the people, from the masses, making them believe that he was arguing on their behalf, when he was only using them on his own behalf. Now, but when we think about Chok, now we take a look. So the first Rashi in this week's Sedra says something very interesting. Rashi says, why does the Torah say Chok? He says, Lefi shahasatan v'umos ha'olam. Satan and the nations of the world, monin es Yisrael, taunt the Jewish people. Lomar maha mitzvah hazos. What is this mitzvah Parah Aduma? Umatam yeshba. What's the reason for it? Leficha kasaba chuka. Therefore, the Torah says it's a decree. You can't question it. In other words, but it's very interesting. The Torah says that the Satan, and the nations of the world taunt the Jewish people about it. Who's the Satan? Satan hu Yetzer Hara hu hamalach hamabes. Satan, our sages tell us very often, is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclinations in man, that sometimes takes him out of reality. And the Umos Olam and the nations of the world. And it's very interesting, and that it mentions Satan before the Umos Olam. And in a sense, I think the nations of the world have their fingers on the pulse of the Jewish people. And they make believe initially. We want to learn from you. Tell us about this mitzvah. He doesn't say, what is the reason for the mitzvah Parah? No. First they say, what is the reason? They give the appearance. They're really interested in understanding. And then, after you start explaining, after you have these economical meetings, which my uncle and Moshe Feinstein and most of the Gedolei Yisrael of the last generation came out against participation. In these meetings. And that's what they said. We have so much to learn from one another. And sometimes I'll go a step further. I want to learn from you. After all, it's good for all religions to learn from each other. So when they see that the Jewish people have tendencies toward this type of thing. But if the Jewish people take a strong stand and they say, I have my religion, you have your religion, practice your religion, don't step on my toes, I won't step on your toes. Religion is a private thing, it's a personal thing. I'm not interested in teaching you about Judaism, and I'm not interested in learning about the other religions. But when they see that the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, and why does the Yetzer Hara so interested? The Yetzer Hara is interested in it because the Yetzer Hara also, this Yetzer Hara wants a certain degree of universalism. There are areas in our religion which have to be separate. By the Akedah, by Yaras Hamakamei Rochak, I always mention that pasuk. When Vahiba Yom Shlishi, it was on the third day when they were going to Mount Moriah. And Vayaras Hamakamei Rochak, they saw Mount Moriah from afar. And the Medrash tells us they saw a heavenly cloud. And Avram turned to Yitzchak and he said to Yitzchak, what do you see? And Yitzchak said, I see a nice mountain and a heavenly cloud attached to it. And then he turned to his two servants. According to the Medrash, it was Yishmael and Eliezer. And he said, what do you see? And Eliezer and Yishmael said, we don't see anything. Stay here with the donkey. He doesn't see anything. You don't see anything. There are areas where our religion has to be private. We do not have to advertise our religion. There are areas that we have to work with the Umos Olam, with the nations of the world. But there are areas that it has to be very private. And it's very interesting. It's similar Rashi with some differences, and it's important to understand the difference, is at the beginning of Chumash Bereshis. But the answer is different in both places. In the Chumash Bereshis, Rashi starts off, the first Rashi in the Chumash, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak was troubled to Medrash Tanchuma. When we were children, they would tell us that Rabbi Yitzchak here was Rashi's father. And but actually it's brought down in the Medrash Tanchuma. So then I saw some people suggested that Rashi wanted to give honor to his father when he started his explanation of Chumash. So he got a statement he found a Medrash in the name of a Tanner and Amora who had the same name as his father. And he said, Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, okay. So why did the Torah have to start with Bereshis Bara Elokim? Who needed it? Why do we need it? The Ramban says in the Torah Shebechsav. Of course, in Torah Shebal Peh we needed it. But why we need it in the Torah Shebechsav? So he says, Matam Pasak Bereshis Mishum Koach Ma'aseh Hagid La'amav. God had to tell his nation the strength of his deeds. She'im Yomru Umos Olam, if the nations of the world will ask you, Matam, excuse me, She'im Yomru Umos Olam Yisrael, listem atem, you are robbers. Shekivashtem Artzu Shiva Goyim, you conquered the lands of the seven nations. The claim that is being made falsely today, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, in one of his interviews, showed how really in what's called the land of Israel, the Palestinians only started settling when the Jews started coming back to the land. But she'im yomru umos olam listem atem shivgastem atzu shivagayim heim omrim lahem kala arichal kadosh baruch hu. That the God created the land, He gave it to whoever He wanted, He took it away from them, and He gave it to whoever else. But there's a difference. By the Parah Aduma, he says, why do I say Chukas? In other words, don't be impressed by what the nations of the world taunt you. Chok. The nations of the world have no perception of the concept of Chok, of a decree. They might have a perception of the idea of a mitzvah. And a mitzvah then means a good deed. But they don't have the constant perception of the idea of a mitzvah, of a chok, of a decree. And to decide if it's a good deed or it's not a good deed, or if it has worth as a good deed or doesn't have worth as a good deed, We have to understand it completely. And of course, we arrogantly realize that we can understand everything. There's no limitation to the human mind. Of course, somehow we don't find cures to all diseases right away, but to the decrees of God, that we can understand automatically. So the nations of the world, when they taunt us about Parah Aduma, doesn't say answer them, but it's a Chok. Just be aware it's a Chok. Don't be impressed with what they said. Don't question the decree. You could study the decree. You could learn about the decree, but don't question the decree. But when it comes to the Eretz Yisrael, not only you have to know the answer, but you tell it to them. Now you really think that when you'll tell the people, oh, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us, we'll read them Bereshis Parah Kimes Shemayim Bes Haaretz. Oh, now we understand. No, but we tend to be impressed with the nations of the world, and there are areas we have to answer them, because unless we'll answer them, especially if it has to do with them. So unless we answer them, they're going to have a bigger influence on us. Not that we expect to convince them, but there are areas in our religion that are private, especially when it comes to ritual. And Parah Aduma is symbolic of that. And we have to understand that Parah Aduma, in a sense, was a kapara for the Egel Hazav. And where did the Egel Hazav come from? It came from the Erev Rab. Those Egyptians that joined the Jewish people. And from time to time, they brought part of their heritage, or whatever they want to call it, and they tried to make it part of Judaism. So the kapara, the atonement for the Egel Hazav, is the Chok, the mitzvah that we can't understand. And as a result of that, and that's the mitzvah that we just do not listen to Mosolam. Do not even consider what they say. It represents our private area of religion. And so this is now, but Chok has another thing. And I mentioned it just before. A Chok, mitzvahs that are not chukim. So a person in his mind could suggest that he's doing it because it's a good deed. I mentioned the non-Jews, when they think of a mitzvah, they have a certain perception of mitzvah. So when they think of a mitzvah, it's a good deed. A good deed. But a chok isn't a good deed. Its significance from our understanding can only be understood as a decree from God. Of course, all the mitzvahs are decrees from God, and we have to do them because the decrees from God. But with the other mitzvahs, we understand the purpose of the mitzvah. But when it comes to chukim, It's one thing. It can only be understood from one perspective. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, submission to God. It's only God. It's very interesting that when you take a look at Korach, I pointed it out in Shul this past Shabbos. When you take a look at Korach, initially, Korach, when he made his decree, when he made his revolt against Moshe, he didn't like Chukim. But he said, he did recognize God. He says, Kaleida kulam doshim uvesocham Hashem, in their midst is God. But what did that lead to? After Korach is burned and swallowed up by the earth, and his followers and their families are swallowed up and burned for their rebellion, what did it lead to? Jewish people were so overcome with the opening up of the earth that they all ran away. They saw the hand of God. But the next day, Vayikalu on Moshe Aaron, they gathered on Moshe and Aaron, and they said, Atem hamitas am Hashem. It wasn't God that opened up the earth and swallowed the people. It was you, Moshe and Aaron. It all depended on their situation, what met their need at the moment. When they had to push Moshe out of the picture. So they said, but when a day after, they saw the earth open up. No, it was Moshe and Aaron who did it themselves, without God. It's very interesting. This doesn't have to do with God, but it shows how people use words, say things, and other people are stupid enough to follow them. Recently, there's a lot of talk about the bombing that took place in Iran. I remember when it was announced that they're considering bombing the nuclear facility that was in the mountain. So the Democrats and there's still many more years left. It's not an issue of a couple days. We have nothing to worry about. And they were talking not just about Israel, they were talking about their own lives, their own children. The same way Korach Vadoso stood there with their children and their families. But Motziin es ha'adam min olam, they lost contact with reality. And then after the bombs destroyed the place completely, which of course they were denying, but everybody else, including most of the people in Iran, destroyed the place completely. In a couple of months, they'll be able to have the bomb again. It's almost at the throwing of the bomb on the mountain and in the mountain. Speed it up! First, it was years beforehand. But that's Motziin es ha'adam min olam, losing contact with reality. When there is hatred, when there is kinna, there is jealousy. When there's taiba, when there is kavod, you could be inconsistent, you could be hypocritical. You don't think logically. And that's what we're facing today. We're facing a society that is motivated by Tina, Taib, and Kavod, by Sinah. And they can say one thing one day and mamash the opposite thing the next day. Look at the Jews. If there was a lesson to be learned in what happened in these last few years, it's a lesson that when they speak against Israel, they're speaking against Israel because of the Jews that are there. They're speaking against the Jewish people. They're attacking on the campuses. Who are they attacking? These weren't Zionists that they were attacking. Probably many of them were anti-Zionists. But the kinataiva and kavod, Metzina Sodom and Olam. But some people, they feel they it's so important for them to be able to identify with the anti-Semites because they want that universal perspective. They want to identify themselves as universalists. So they come up with this thing. Oh, no, they're not anti-Semites. They're just anti-Zionists. So what they did on October 7th, when they raped the women, you're a universalist. Do you justify that? When they put little children in the oven, it's interesting, by Adas Korach, it says, keep away from them. Separate yourself from Adas Korach. It wasn't just the 250 people, but everybody that was in their camp. People who might not have even been involved. Why is it? Because sometimes when you stand with them, you are giving them support. And we find now, unfortunately, after all of this is over, there are some Jews. I'm not even talking about the crazy Framax that demonstrate against Israel. The capos, the religious capos. We have religious capos and we have non-religious capos. But the capos, they're because they want to see themselves as universalists. Because they want to see themselves as universalists. They want to support October 7th. They want to support. They support the people that throw bombs in hospitals. Yes, Israel had to take action in hospitals also, but those hospitals were the headquarters of the murderers. Those hospitals contained the missiles that were used to kill civilians among the Jewish people. Those hospitals were they were not getting gas and all that because they were using it for their rockets. But when they bombed the hospital in Beersheba, near Beersheba, that took care not just of Jews, but took care of Arabs, took care of Christians, of Muslims, took care of all human beings. We didn't see all these people crying out, screaming. Where was that crazy lady that was blowing the shofar shortly after October 7th against the Jewish people. We have to understand that that the that the the idea of Chok, is that the idea of Chok represents the idea that the mitzvos HaTorah, we don't do the mitzvos HaTorah because of the message in the mitzvah. Of course, it's important to understand the message of the mitzvah, but we do the mitzvos of the Torah because of the command of God. And this is by when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, why is it that we have to answer them? Because now, if you take a look at the Rashi, the way the Mefarshim explain Rashi, the question is: the Torah is a book of mitzvos, and as a book of mitzvos, why does it have to tell us about creation? And the answer is: a person is more determined to keep what belongs to him than to take what belongs to somebody else. The Jewish people, when they fight the war for Israel, it has to be based on the knowledge. That's part of the mitzvah of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, of knowing that Eretz Yisrael is ours. And if we don't know that Eretz Yisrael is ours, if we don't know the reason for it, if we don't know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us, and it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's to give to us. And I could add another word to Rashi. Eretz Yisrael was originally, as we see in Parshas Lech Lecha, Eretz Yisrael was originally given to the Bnei Shem, but the Canaanim came and took it away from the Bnei Shem. The Jewish people are the descendants of the Bnei Shem. So we have to know that that Eretz Yisrael, even though Eretz Yisrael is a chok also, it's a mitzvah of the Torah also, and it's a mitzvah that we do because HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us. But it affects the way we do the mitzvah. Psychologically, we have to know our rights to the land. Consequently, we have to answer them. Emor lahem. We have to answer them. But when it comes to Parah Aduma, that's not an area that we have to be involved with them all together. That's a private area. Shvulachem po im achamor. You stay here with the donkey. This is not for you. When certain areas of religion are private areas. It's not. Well, I'm not interested in your religion. I'm not interested in your ritual. There's no reason for you to be interested in my ritual. And usually, if you are interested in my ritual, it's only to taunt us. You make believe that you're trying to understand when you're really trying to make us not understand, to make us look bad. And unfortunately, there are Jews that have a very bad self-perception. And because they have a very bad self-perception, they evaluate everything on the basis of the way the Umos Olam evaluate things. The Umos Olam evaluate things only on the basis of a good deed and a bad deed. And even there, they determine the good deed on what works best for them and works best for the desire of their desires that emanate from kinah, taiva, and kavod. And so this is the difference. By the Umos Olam, when it comes to ritual, we don't explain. But there are areas that very often that have to do with helping people out. There we can work with the nations of the world. But when it comes to the private areas, the ritual areas, we have no reason, we have nothing to learn from them, and we have no reason to teach them anything either. Okay.
Thank you, Moshe. We're
Yeah.
going to skip the questions today, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for the share.
Okay. Rabbi, I see you called. What's going on?
Oh, called by accident. I'm sorry.
Huh? Oh, okay. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'm in touch.